For 200,000 years, humans lived in small, scattered bands, moving across vast landscapes. Waste was not a problem. It was simply left behind. The group moved on, the winds scattered it, rain washed it away, the earth absorbed it. There were no accumulations, no concentrated filth. The human footprint was light enough that nature could process it faster than people could produce it. This was the invisible equilibrium that governed human waste for most of our existence as a species. Then, around 10,000 years ago, everything changed. Humans stopped moving. They planted crops. They built permanent shelters. Villages emerged. Within those villages, people ate, slept, and eliminated waste in the same confined space day after day, year after year. For the first time in history, human waste became a problem that could not simply be walked away from. The system that had worked for millennia collapsed the moment people stopped moving. And with that collapse came the first great challenge of civilized life: what to do with the accumulation. The earliest solution was the most obvious: dig a hole, cover it, dig another. This worked when populations were small, when settlements were modest clusters of huts surrounded by open land. But as villages grew into towns and towns into cities, the holes multiplied. They appeared in courtyards, beneath floors, against walls. Cesspits, as they came to be called, were excavated beneath homes and public spaces. They were lined with stone or brick sealed with clay. They collected everything: human waste, animal waste, kitchen scraps, ashes, dead animals, broken pottery. When they filled, they were covered over, and new ones were dug nearby. In dense urban centers, cesspits were everywhere: beneath the houses, beneath the street, leaking into the soil, seeping into wells. The ground itself became saturated with human waste. The earth, which had once absorbed the scattered leavings of nomadic bands, could no longer keep pace with the concentrated output of stationary populations. Around 5,000 years ago, in the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia and the Indus, engineers began to understand that waste needed to be moved, not merely stored. The cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the Indus Valley civilization constructed sophisticated drainage networks. Houses had private bathing areas. Wastewater flowed through channels beneath the floors, exiting into brick-lined street drains that carried it away from residential quarters. Some homes had vertical chutes connecting to these drains, primitive toilets that allowed waste to drop directly into flowing channels. It was an early recognition of a fundamental principle: waste must be separated from living spaces and moved beyond the boundaries of human habitation. The system worked because the cities were planned, the population controlled, and the infrastructure maintained by a centralized authority. It was one of humanity's first experiments in collective sanitation, a recognition that managing waste required more than individual action. It required coordination, engineering, and most importantly, the continuous flow of water to carry contamination away. The Romans took this concept further and built it at a scale that would define urban life for centuries. They constructed aqueducts that brought millions of gallons of fresh water into their cities daily. They built massive sewer systems, the most famous being the Cloaca Maxima, a channel large enough to drive a cart through. Public latrines were installed throughout the empire, stone benches with holes arranged in rows, often without partitions. Dozens of people sat side by side, conducting their business in full view of one another. Water flowed continuously beneath the benches, carrying waste away into the sewers and out to the Tiber River. It was communal. It was efficient. It was also, by modern standards, deeply unsanitary. The same sponge on a stick, rinsed in a shared channel of running water, was used by everyone for cleaning. Diseases spread easily in such environments, but for the time it represented an extraordinary achievement. The Romans understood that urban life required infrastructure to manage waste. They built that infrastructure at a scale that would not be matched for over 1,000 years, creating a system where waste disappeared from sight the moment it left the body. The illusion of cleanliness, however, was just that. The waste still existed, it simply moved downstream. When the Roman Empire collapsed, so did its sanitation systems. The aqueducts fell into disrepair, the sewers clogged and were abandoned. Europe entered a period of profound infrastructural decline, and with it came a return to the most primitive methods of waste management. Medieval cities had no centralized systems, no flowing water, no underground channels. People returned to what they had always known. Keep it close, then throw it away. Chamber pots were kept in bedrooms. In the morning, their contents were thrown out of windows into the streets below. A warning shout was customary, but not always heeded. Pedestrians learned to walk close to buildings to avoid the cascade from above. Streets became open sewers. Waste piled in gutters, mixing with mud, animal droppings, and refuse. Rain washed some of it into rivers, but much of it simply accumulated, forming layers of filth that raised street levels over time. In castles, small rooms called garderobes were built into walls, with openings that dropped waste into moats or pits below. They offered convenience, but no real solution. The waste still had to go somewhere, and that somewhere was usually directly beneath the living quarters, fermenting in the summer heat. The stench was constant, disease was rampant. The connection between filth and illness was not understood, but the effects were undeniable. Cities smelled of decay, and that decay killed. As cities grew larger through the centuries, the problem intensified in direct proportion to population density. By the 18th century, London was one of the largest cities in the world, and it was drowning in its own waste. Houses were packed tightly together, streets were narrow and winding, cesspits beneath homes were filled to overflowing, their contents seeping into the surrounding soil. Night soil men, workers who emptied cesspits under cover of darkness, hauled the waste away in carts. Some of it was sold to farmers as fertilizer, returning nutrients to the land in an ancient cycle. But most of it was dumped into the Thames, the great artery of the city. The river became a repository for everything the city wanted to discard: dead animals, industrial byproducts, human excrement. The Thames ran thick with it, its water dark and viscous. And the river was also the source of drinking water. People drank, washed, and cooked with water drawn from the same place they dumped their waste. The cycle was vicious and invisible. No one yet understood that disease could travel through water, that invisible organisms could multiply in filth and spread through the very liquid that sustained life. The prevailing medical theory was miasma, the belief that illness came from bad air, from poisonous vapors rising from decomposing matter. If it smelled foul, it was dangerous. This theory was not entirely wrong, but it missed the critical mechanism of transmission. The real danger was not the smell, it was the water. The invisible contamination flowing through the pipes and wells, carrying death into every household that drew from a tainted source. The miasma theory led to responses that were logical but ineffective: burning aromatic woods, avoiding drafts, staying away from swamps. Meanwhile, the actual vectors of disease, bacteria thriving in human waste, spread unchecked through the water supply. The introduction of the flush toilet in the late 18th century, while an engineering marvel, initially made the problem catastrophically worse. Sir John Harington had designed the first flushing mechanism in 1596, a novelty installed for Queen Elizabeth I, but it required enormous amounts of water and was impractical for widespread use. In 1775, Alexander Cumming patented the first modern flush toilet, complete with an S-shaped pipe that used standing water to create a seal against sewer gases. It was refined further by Joseph Bramah and others, becoming more reliable and affordable. By the early 19th century, flush toilets were becoming common in the homes of the wealthy. They were clean, they were convenient, they eliminated the smell from the home. But they created a new problem that no one anticipated. The toilets were connected to cesspits, or, increasingly, to the old rainwater drains that emptied directly into rivers. Every flush sent gallons of water mixed with human waste into these systems. The old cesspits, designed to slowly absorb waste through seepage, were overwhelmed by the sudden influx of liquid. They overflowed constantly. The drains, originally designed to carry rainwater away during storms, were never meant to handle sewage. The volume increased exponentially with each new toilet installed, and all of it poured into the Thames, transforming the river into an open sewer on a scale never before seen. In the summer of 1858, London experienced what became known as the Great Stink. The temperature climbed day after day. The water level in the Thames dropped, exposing vast mudflats of accumulated waste. The sun beat down on decades of human excrement, and the accumulated filth of millions of people exposed to the heat began to decompose. The smell was so overpowering that Parliament could not meet. Members soaked the curtains in lime chloride to mask the odor. It did not help. The stench infiltrated the building, seeping through every window, every door. Government nearly ground to a halt. Citizens fled the city if they could afford to. Newspapers ran apocalyptic headlines. The city, it seemed, was being punished for its own filth, choking on what it had created. The crisis forced a reckoning that decades of suffering had not. For years, reformers had warned that the city's sanitation was inadequate, that the water supply was contaminated, that disease was inevitable. But infrastructure was expensive, taxes were unpopular, political will was lacking. The Great Stink changed the calculation. The smell made the problem impossible to ignore, forcing action where death alone had not. Cholera had already provided the evidence, but the evidence had been rejected. The disease arrived in London in 1831, a terrifying new affliction from Asia. It killed rapidly, violently. Victims suffered explosive diarrhea and vomiting, losing liters of fluid in hours. Dehydration was so severe that skin turned blue and leathery, eyes sank deep into skulls, voices became faint whispers. Death could occur within hours of the first symptoms, transforming healthy adults into corpses in a single day. The disease struck without warning and without apparent pattern, hitting rich and poor neighborhoods alike. In 1854, during a severe outbreak in Soho, a physician named John Snow began plotting cases on a map. He noticed that they clustered around a single public water pump on Broad Street. He investigated and discovered that a cesspit beneath a nearby house had leaked into the well supplying the pump. The contaminated water was spreading the disease with every bucket drawn. Snow convinced authorities to remove the pump handle, and the outbreak subsided within days. It was the first clear demonstration that cholera was waterborne, transmitted through contaminated drinking water rather than corrupted air. But his findings were met with skepticism and resistance. The miasma theory was too deeply entrenched, supported by centuries of tradition and the authority of the medical establishment. It took years for his work to gain acceptance, years during which cholera returned again and again. In 1848, it killed 14,000 Londoners. In 1854, another 10,000. In 1866, it struck again despite Snow's discovery, killing thousands more. Each outbreak followed the same pattern, spreading fastest in areas where drinking water was drawn from the most polluted sections of the Thames. The evidence was overwhelming, but changing the system required more than evidence. It required money, planning, and the disruption of an entire city. The solution demanded a transformation of London's entire infrastructure, a project of such scale that it seemed almost impossible. Joseph Bazalgette, chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, designed a system of underground sewers that would intercept waste before it reached the Thames and divert it eastward, miles downstream from the city where the river emptied into the sea. Construction began in 1859, just a year after the Great Stink made delay intolerable. It was one of the largest engineering projects of the 19th century. 82 miles of main sewers were built, supported by more than 1,000 miles of street drains feeding into them. The sewers were massive brick-lined tunnels, large enough for a man to walk through upright, built to last for generations. They ran beneath the city, following the natural slope of the land, using gravity to move waste without the need for constant pumping. Pumping stations were constructed at critical points to lift sewage over obstacles where gravity alone could not do the work. Embankments were built along the Thames to house the intercepting sewers and create new roadways, reclaiming land from the river while hiding the infrastructure beneath. The project took over a decade to complete, It cost more than £3 million, an astronomical sum that sparked fierce political debate, but it worked with a totality that justified every penny spent. By the 1870s, cholera had disappeared from London. Typhoid rates plummeted. Infant mortality declined sharply. The life expectancy of Londoners increased by nearly 20 years over the following decades. The system Bazalgette designed is still in use today, handling the waste of a city far larger than he could have imagined, a testament to the foresight of building infrastructure not just for the present, but for an unknown future. The transformation was not merely technical, it was psychological and social, reshaping how people understood their relationship with their own biome. For the first time in human history, waste became truly invisible. Over 2 billion people still lack access to basic sanitation. They use pit latrines, shared facilities that overflow during rains, or nothing at all. Open defecation remains common in parts of Africa and Asia, continuing practices that Europe abandoned a century ago. Cholera outbreaks continue to erupt during conflicts and natural disasters, wherever sanitation systems break down or never existed, killing thousands in conditions nearly identical to those of Victorian London. The toilet was never just a device for convenience or comfort. It was a solution to a problem that threatened the viability of urban life itself. It is maintained by constant effort, constant investment, constant vigilance, and constant maintenance of systems that were built decades ago and are now reaching the end of their designed lifespan. The moment that effort ceases, the system begins to fail, and the consequences of failure are the same now as they were 200 years ago. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, death. Diarrheal diseases, almost all of them preventable with clean water and proper sanitation, are the second leading cause of death in children under 5 globally. The toilet is not a triumph of human ingenuity that solved a problem forever. It is a compromise, a temporary solution to a permanent problem. It works only as long as the infrastructure supporting it remains intact and functional. It is effective only for those with access to that infrastructure. For half the world's population, the system has never existed. They live in the conditions that Europe escaped a century ago, and the diseases that killed millions then continue to kill millions now. The toilet did not eliminate human waste, it buried it. It moved it out of sight. It created a distance between cause and effect, between action and consequence, that allows people to forget that the problem exists at all, until it doesn't. Until the pipes burst, until the treatment plant fails, until the river turns foul, until the smell returns. And when the smell returns, it brings with it the memory of what life was like before. The streets thick with filth, the water undrinkable, the air heavy with decay, the knowledge that every surface might be contaminated, every drink might be poisoned, every breath might carry disease. This is not ancient history. This is not a problem that has been solved. This is the reality for billions of people right now, and the reality that awaits any city whose infrastructure collapses. The moment the promise is broken, the past returns, not as history, as present, immediate, inescapable.